Hey guys, Dave from Nerdarchy for Nerds by Nerds. Today I'm hanging out with Christopher Haskin of Nord Games, and we're going to be talking about using terrain in your games, and how to make your encounters more dynamic by using terrain, whether it's physical representation on the table, whether you're scribbling on on graph paper, or you're using theater of the mind. And then of course there's always actual physical objects as well. So how are you doing today, sir?
Doing quite well. Just getting things rolling here. Today is the last day of our Kickstarter, and it's been a crazy ride. We've had some interesting ups and downs. Definitely a different sort of campaign. I think that campaigns that are toward the end of the year usually have this sort of um, frantic feel to the pledges. So if you look at the graphs, they go up and down like crazy. I think that a lot of people, they jump in, they back it, and then they go, oh wait, Christmas money, and then they jump out or they lower their pledge. A lot of adjustments, and I think that's just indicative of a third quarter or close to Christmas campaign. We saw the same thing with our terrain tiles last year that we did in December.
So speaking of which, so terrain, how do you feel like you got? I know you guys have run at least a game since the last time we talked with using your terrain on the table. You kind of unveiled it for the first time for some of your players. How do you
Mhm.
feel that affected the experience and the kind of encounters you're able to build for your players?
I definitely think that it takes it up a notch from what we traditionally do, which is either theater of the mind or using just a grid. Sometimes if you're playing some sort of campaign that you can access the maps for and you can print them out full size, which isn't always the case, but if you can, that's pretty fun too. But when you add that 3D element to the table, all of a sudden people are climbing up onto things, they're hiding behind things, and it makes things so much more dynamic. And now that we've got so many models that we're producing, we're going to be using the terrain all the time. And it's not, this is for ruins, so it would be applicable to any time you had ruins in your adventure. But we do a lot actually in our adventure. The our world and where everything takes place typically has quite a lot of ruins and abandoned civilizations and stuff. And so it's part of why it made the most sense for us to start there. So yeah, all in all, it really took our gaming experience to the next level.
Yeah, do you find now, like now I imagine you're just like inundated with pieces of terrain all over your house. Do you find that gets you thinking more about like how about the encounters you can design with that
Y-
stuff?
Yeah, and the way that we've built these pieces, they're designed to be somewhat modular in that not all of them are connected. Like we've got, I'll just grab some pieces, for example. Um, so like we have this big piece that is designed to be part of the church set. And this is where the big window would have been when the church was complete. But we also have a corner piece that was, in my mind, designed to be the front door. So like this edge here would have been where the front door was. And you could make this thing as big as you want, really, and represent it as large or as small of a church as you want. Additionally, with this set, we have um, these pillars, and there's 6 of these that come with the set. So you can place these around to represent where the pillars would have been, and there could be some that are missing or what have you. So you could make this as large or as small as you want to, which I think is really one of the powerful parts of these ruins. They're not just one solid piece that you have to always use in this configuration.
it it's cool in the sense too, like even if you're doing like a dungeon and you can use pieces to kind of like plop down the represent things, even though it may not actually be what was there before, what is there now. But right, because it's all broken up pieces of like wall and stuff like that. So so you can absolutely use them as, even though it's a village set, you could just throw them in there. Like this was a temple at one time in the dungeon.
Yeah, our set four, it's sort of an accessories, low walls and stuff. Here's some pieces from that. This is a great option if you want a lot of variability. So you can represent, a house, a large building, a temple, what have you, and you do it by basically turning these different ways and making your layout. So just making it more dynamic and making these pieces more useful for the end users, and not just this is the piece and that's all it can be. Those are cool. I mean, those are definitely applicable, but what we thought was to give it more variability, to make them separate pieces, and you get to design it on your own.
Now, the last encounter that I designed, where I really tried to be creative and make it more interesting for my players, they totally lampooned it by basically bringing the encounter outside of the encounter area. I guess I could have maybe tried to force them a little bit. So I had this area, this cavern with all kinds of like runes on the floors that would do different things if they stepped on them, or if the enemy if anybody stepped on them, really. So I was like, this will make it more interesting. But they kind of like kited all of my monsters into like going into the hallway.
Yeah. So let's stay away from those runes that are going to possibly do bad things to us, and we'll just bring all the monsters right over here, kill the monsters, and then go and figure out what these runes do. Yeah, that's where what I would have done maybe is had some thing that blocked their exit, so to essentially force them. Either a big monster comes up from behind, or there's a trap that triggers and a block slides down or something like that. In fact, I was doing some writing last night and thinking those same terms. Well, here's where the encounter takes place, in this clearing within the forest. How do I keep the players there and not just have them run away? So you have to think about things like, okay, so maybe there's tendrils of vines that connect and close the only exit to this clearing. So that's basically what seemed like the most logical thing to do. And then they could cut their way through the vines, but while they're doing that, then the monsters are attacking them from behind. So they've got to basically face the monsters. And that's, I think, in your dungeon mastery, you're really telling a story. And if you want the story to take place in a certain area, then you just sometimes have to, make sure that that's where the encounter happens.
Yeah, I don't think it was the runes were visible. I just had things marked out for myself. But it's one of the disadvantages with the way I kind of run. Like most of my stuff is improv, and like there's a couple pieces that Ted had laying around, and we game at his place, that I saw, and I'm like, I want to use those. And it was literally like 20, 30 minutes before the session, so I just lay out some stuff on the table. And and at the same time, I'm also a yes GM. I rarely tell them they can't try or do something.
Yeah, me too.
That is the strength, though, of taking more time to design encounters and put things together, where you would ask yourself questions like, well, what happens if this happens? And how bad do I really want them to go into this area? Then you would come up with cool and creative things.
Well, and I DM similar to you in that a lot of it is improv and a lot of it is done on the fly. And what's neat about that is some of my players, they have notebooks and they just keep notes of what's going on. And so if I ever lose track of the name of something or what have you, I go, oh, hey, Luke, what did I say a minute ago? What was his name? And then I'll be like, oh, it was Colgren. I'm like, oh, okay, Colgren. So that really helps. So sometimes when you're that type of DM, you just need to let your players, A, do some of the storytelling for you, and B, do some of the rules management for you, or the note taking for you, because you're in this creative mode. You're trying to tell a fun story and stuff, and sometimes you just can't recall some of those details. But in the case of encounters, I usually have an idea of where I want it to happen, and if there's a dynamic space that it has to happen in, then I try to make sure it happens in that space.
I have tons and tons of DM notes, but they're all from the session as it's happening. So it really just looks like the scrawlings of a madman on a piece of paper. And that's what I do. And a lot of times too, I do like to go to the players and let them, you know, add stuff into the game. For instance, if it's a town or city they've been from, I might be like, hey, you know, you guys are going to if you guys are going to a tavern, you tell me the name of the tavern you like to go to.
Yeah, because what you can say is, you guys have been here before. What is the tavern that you like the most? And sometimes the games are like, you're supposed to tell us that, and I don't know what tavern you like the most. And then they go, oh yeah, we get to tell stories too. And so that's a pretty unique thing. There's a lot of stuff blown up in the chat. I don't know if anyone's asking questions yet. I want to make sure that we don't. No, you and I can talk for hours. Obviously, I want to make sure that no one has questions that we're ignoring here.
Well, guys, if you have questions, either put GM911 in front of it or question in front of it, so this way we can pick them out easily. Otherwise, it's just a sea of text. And feel free to ask questions. If you have questions about encounter design, about terrain, about the Kickstarter that's going on, and obviously, guys, as always, if you're new around here, I always put the links in the description so you can go check it out.
Yeah, Doug said, even if you just had one piece, it still adds something to an otherwise flat grid map. That's totally true. I love the ChessX grid map. And for cons and stuff, they usually provide us with something similar to that. It's like a wet erase sort of board, laminated sort of grid. And that's truly a great way of telling the story if all you really have access to is some pens and maybe some miniatures. But if you do have the ability to bring terrain, the terrain just makes things so much more amazing. At the last convention that I went to, because we've been pretty busy, so I only got to go to one this year. Stefan Picorni was running from Dwarven Forge, was running a game. I didn't get to play in it, but I got to go and hang out with everybody and hang out with Stefan. Everyone was just so stoked because you had this tower and you had this underground thing and you had the catacombs and everything, and that makes games so much more interesting and so much more dynamic. And so it was after that game, I said, I'm definitely bringing terrain next year because I want my players to have something more than the map, something more than the grid. And but you know, not everyone has the ability to cart around their terrain.
Well,
it does get quite overcoming or cumbersome.
Even the map and grid, if you use it differently, can really change things and make them more dynamic. When we were at let's see, where were we? Origins, and Cobalt Press had like a whole room where they were running games in. And they're running. We actually played in a Pathfinder game set in their Midgard setting, run by Stephen Rowe. And you know, the setting was basically these kaiju-like monsters that are like locked in place, frozen in time, and like he described that they move, but they move so slow it's like tectonic plates moving. And there's these goblins that revere them and find them and basically hollow them out and build, you know, structures on top of them. So that was like the setting of the adventure. And literally, like the where we were, there was two of them locked in battle, and literally chunks of monster had gone flying and then was frozen in place. So there was these islands of monster meat, right? And the final encounter took place on these islands of monster pieces that were like
monster meat.
Yeah, they were connected by rope bridges, and we're you know, we're like low level, so like if you get knocked off or fall off, it's going to be catastrophic. There was an object that we were trying to get away from the bad guys, I should say, and there was also a dragon coming in at the same time. So all these things added tension to the encounter. So the object basically keeps anyone who is around these giant monsters from going crazy because like psychic emanations come off of them, and and this artifact is the only thing that's keeping people sane. So it was really fun because we had to fight the monsters, fight these goblins. At the same time, we're trying to get this object. So it's almost like a game of football, in the middle of the D&D battle. And and also we have to deal with, oh, there's a dragon coming in. We need to not be here when it gets here.
Mm-hmm.
And like we came up with the strategy of, oh, if we can get away before the dragon comes back with the object, it's going to go insane and just start wrecking everything. And that'll take care of the goblin problem. So even though it was just flat grids, Steven had like drawn out all the maps in the different locations. So visually, it gave you something to look at. It gave you an idea of how you can interact with the terrain.
Well, so if we broke everything down into a 3 parts, and we said one was theater of the mind. That's one style. Another style would be the grid maps and pens and potentially minis, maybe not. Maybe you just draw a circle where you are and put the first letter of your name there to indicate that's you, and here's the monster and whatever. But you have to keep on erasing and redrawing. And the other one would be the terrain and minis. I would consider that the ultimate version of playing a tabletop role-playing game. If you broke those down into those 3 different ways of playing, they all have their pluses and minuses. If we start with theater of the mind, there's no limit. You simply have to be a good describer and narrator and make sure that your players don't get frustrated by the fact that they might not have a good concept of distance and scale and that kind of thing. So if you're good at it, which I know many people who are good at it, then great, run those sorts of games. If you go with the grid map and the pen option, what's great about that is now you give an idea of scale, distance, relative spatial relations, but you can give any number of them. You're not limited by what terrain you might have. You can draw any shape. Doesn't matter. And then when you go to the tabletop terrain and miniatures, yes, you got something gorgeous and visual and 3-dimensional and all that, but you are limited by what models you have. And so there's pluses and minuses to all of them. Me personally, because I'm super visual, super into the tactics and strategy on the board, I prefer the third option, which is really good terrain, miniatures, models. I mean, you guys can see in the background, this is about 1/10 of all the miniatures that I have. They're just the really, really big ones that don't fit into my boxes very well. So I really go for that third tier of the miniature gaming, style, and the storytelling and everything. I like to. I mean, obviously, when I'm dungeon mastering and I'm telling the story, I'm usually just using theater of the mind, and we're in the town and they're talking to this person, that person. I don't really need to set up a town. Every single scene doesn't need to be set up. But when it comes to the actual encounter, battle, that kind of thing, or if they're searching through something, I usually try to set up something cool and visual for them to move their miniature around on, especially if it's in a dungeon situation, because they might be tripping a trap where, if we're talking theater of the mind, I have to describe to them maybe something that gives away the fact that there's a trap there. And, then they're catching on like, oh, okay, well, I'm not going to go over there. But if I had just some Dwarven Forge, terrain set up, they can't tell that there's a trap there. It just happens to be, something, sand is not on that part of the map or something like that. And then they're, I wonder what that means. Let's go and investigate, instead of just avoiding it completely. They can say, I will walk up, they can take their miniature and say, I'm going to walk up right to the edge of this thing and investigate it. Whereas some dungeon masters who do theater of the mind, they go, ooh, you walk and you trip right into it and you fall 100 feet and die. So that's people. Some players can be very wary of the theater of the mind because they feel like they always get tricked into doing things that they didn't intend to actually do.
That's exactly why we kind of started using more grid and stuff like that. I would also offer up there's kind of a fourth way of playing as well.
Sure.
Whether it's over the internet or in person, virtual tabletops are becoming really big, and you're seeing people build them right into their tables. So, you know, and
yeah,
that's a lot of upfront costs, but over, I think, the course of time, you know, you're probably going to you'd probably save a ton of money and not have to store a bunch of stuff.
Well, the only issue with that really for someone like me is mobility. I do like being able to take my stuff to other people's houses or the game store or a convention and play there too. So that's another consideration that I always think about. How mobile is this stuff that I'm acquiring?
Yeah, well, that's absolutely true as well. So yeah, pretty much every method has its pros and its cons.
Yeah. On the topic of virtual tabletops, I want to point out that if anyone's a Roll20 player, if you use Roll20 a lot, we actually just added a bunch of stuff to the marketplace there. All of our critical hit decks and treasure decks are now live on Roll20 marketplace, and there will be more products on their way. Just FYI.
Oh, score. Do you have any plans of going over to Fantasy Grounds as well?
Let's see. We have our Skullduggery and I believe the Ultimate Bestiary are on Fantasy Grounds. But at this point in time, we've just had, I know that Fantasy Grounds, they've been doing a lot of revamping of their system. And so they've been focusing on that. Roll20 hasn't been focusing on, you know, obviously they've got their own internal stuff going on to develop awesome, cool new features, but they also have people that are just dedicated to adding stuff to the marketplace. So that's what we've been working directly with them. So it's been going really, really well. So we have some questions.
We do. Zarif Gaming, do you have any pieces that aren't dungeon based, say Town City or Tavern pieces? I can actually answer that because the first set is a ruined village, and that is the first one. So
yeah, so if you go to the Kickstarter, you can see all of the. Do we have a link to the Kickstarter on the show? Yeah, okay. If you just click show more on the video, you can see the Kickstarter link right there. You'll be able to see all the different pieces, all the sets, and they're all part of a ruined town. And you can make whatever you want, taverns and that kind of stuff, out of probably the accessories pack, which is set for number 4, low walls and that kind of thing. The rest of them are designed to be like, there's a big church, there's houses and huts and that kind of stuff. We also have some add-on pieces that are more like fortified walls and some other interesting pieces for you. So yes, this whole set for this Kickstarter is all village themed, and we will have future Kickstarters. We're also talking about potentially turning it into some sort of a subscription-based thing where every month we create a new piece and we ship it to everybody who's subscribed to the program. We're actually curious how people feel about that, if that would be something they're interested in, and make sure that it's something that you guys would actually use.
So Gary Smith has a question. You guys have done like a dozen Kickstarters at this point, so I guess you're probably a good guy to ask. What is the most important thing to consider when starting a Kickstarter?
Gary, I would say make sure that your logistics and fulfillment are sort of worked out. When I was in high school, I took Autoshop, and I don't know if Autoshop even exists anymore in high schools, but we learned how to work the brake system and repair the brake system and stuff before we ever got into the engines or anything like that. And the instructor, Mr. DeYoung, said, you are not going to be able to work on any of my car's engines or drive any of my cars until you know how to stop them. And I think that in Kickstarters, you should know how to fulfill them before you figure out all the production logistics and all that stuff. So the most important thing would be to make sure that you can fulfill what you intend to. That's, I think, one of the biggest failings of most Kickstarters, not just gaming Kickstarters, but Kickstarters in general. Look at the Coolest Cooler, for example. They had this huge project, raise tons and tons of money, and then they can't actually fulfill all the orders. Like, what? How does that work? So that's what I would say is the most important thing. And then work backward from there. Think about the end point, which is your fulfillment, and then work backward and say, okay, fulfillment, then work back to production, then work back to, artwork and creation, and do it that way. And then have your project as complete as you can before you ever launch. If you have graphics and you have all the resources necessary to be able to show, hey, this is what the thing's going to look like, here's a prototype, here's a this, here's a that, you're more likely to get funded because people can visualize, and it's not just, hey, we have an idea, this is the idea, and please back our project. You're not going to see much funding if that's the way you go. You want to have something to show people.
I have a Kickstarter. I won't say who it is, but I backed a Kickstarter probably like 3 years ago, and I'm still waiting. They keep talking to us though, but they've had so many logistical problems with manufacturing.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. And anybody who is curious and want to know more information, feel free to directly message me on Facebook or however you want to get a hold of me. I'm more than happy to help you and coach you. And and if there's gaming ideas that you have that you want a publisher for, Nord Games is always looking for more creative people and more ideas to publish. And obviously, people get royalties from those. So just FYI.
Yeah, the Nord Games, there's a link to their website in the description, and from there you can find all of their social media, and then you can harass Christopher to your heart's content.
Yeah, I don't mind. I mean, it's what happens is we end up getting really talented people to work for us usually, or we can help other people. And Bill over at Frog God Games, I was talking to him several months ago, and because he's been a mentor for me, and I said, hey, you know what, Bill, I really want to just show my appreciation and let you know I really do value everything that you've done for me and helped me out over the years with your advice and stuff. And it's been awesome because I've been able to have success on my own with my own company. And he, without like skipping a beat, just said, rising tides raise all ships, my friend. And I went, huh, it's true that the better we do, the better we all do. And especially in the gaming industry, because we can all help each other. And when they just launched a Kickstarter for their Tome of Horrors for 5th edition. So we're helping them out to promote that, because the more gamers that get involved, the more we all benefit. So I think that was some of the best, advice that I've ever gotten. Absolutely.
I love it. So WebDM is a YouTube channel that started after us and just blew by us, and they have such amazing production value over there. And I'm friends with all those guys, and their secret weapon is Travis Bowles, who does YouTube videos kind of for a living outside of the gaming industry. But like, I know it takes him like a week to produce like one video. So I love it because you know what, once they've gotten their WebDM fill and there's no more videos left to watch, there's another 6 days of the week that people are going to want to watch, D&D content. So yeah, we're here for you.
Yeah, there's always a niche to fill somewhere, and finding your niche is important. But that's a very long answer to a very simple question. Hopefully, Gary, I answered your question. And if you do have any more questions, feel free to send me a direct message or go to our website. Contact form is on there. Doug has a question. Does Chris dream one day of having his game world built in miniature in the basement, like a model train set? Yeah, I would love to have just, okay, here's Barflat, here's Midway, here's all these different places that I've created in my mind. There was an image floating around not long ago of this guy who had like a seaport that went to a beach, that went to a forest, that went to this huge city, and below the city you could take the city off of the table, and there was like a whole catacombs network and stuff. I just drooled over that. I'm like, wow, to be able to have that much gaming space, all packed into that one table, it looked amazing. And I would love at some point to have a dedicated room or, outbuilding barn or something like that, where I could put all my gaming related stuff and have tons of people over and go through epic adventures together. That would be,
it would be
say
like
again?
Christmas all the time.
I know. It
So
would be one of those things where I would invite people, all the celebrities to come and, play D&D at this awesome set. And I mean, it would be awesome, but that comes with time.
So I want to jump in the roll call, guys. Sound off where you're coming to us from. Lincoln has said, what about augmented reality terrain? Has that been done? I guess it depends exactly what you're talking about by augmented reality terrain and what you're looking for. Like, I get like, is adding lights, is that augmented? Like, or do you need special like viewers to kind of like unveil things?
On the topic of lights and stuff, if you haven't seen all the cool accessories that Dwarven Forge has put out for their miniatures, they've got lights, little LED lanterns, and torches and orbs and all kinds of super cool stuff. So check those out if you want to, kick it up a notch with your own terrain.
When we were
good.
When we were out in LA, Maze Arcana, we lucked out. We happened to be there where they had a surprise that they were had been working on for a long time for the group, and most of them didn't know about it. Only a few of them did, and we got to help them bring it in. And it was the throne room to shit, I can't think of the name of the kingdom anywhere. I want to say Thrain. No, it's not Thrain, because that's the silver flame. But the one that's everything is Ursa and everything is bears. Breland. So the kingdom of Breland, and it came in 4 pieces, and it's a throne room, and it had all the lights, and it had bear heads on the walls, and they were magnetized, so you could pull them off if you wanted to and swap them out. It was this coolest thing. And also, I don't know if they actually had a combat there or not. We actually, just before they started, we ran out to a fan meetup, so I didn't actually get to watch the session, but they might have had it just for a big social event that was happening in their game. So it was just another use of the terrain. Now they have a little bit of an unfair advantage because they're in LA with people that build sets than like their friends and stuff. So, but it was super cool to see. Like, it's literally something like someone would have used like on a movie set.
Well, the very first time that I ever saw Dwarven Forge, I saw some of their older sets, but this guy, it was at a convention. I'm trying to remember the name of the convention. For some reason, I want to say it was DragonCon or DundraCon or something like that here in California. And I walk in the room and I see that spread out over several tables is this network, this gorgeous network of dungeon leading into cave, which then led into tavern. Like you went from the tavern down through the cellar into the cave, which then broke into the dungeon at some point in time. So the dungeon had its own entrance, but you could come in the back way through the tavern. And I just remember looking down at this, and all these guys were sitting around getting ready for the game and stuff. And I just came over and went, is this Dwarven Forge? I'd never seen Dwarven Forge in real life before. I forget, like 18 or something like that. And they were like, yeah. And I picked one of them up, and it was super heavy. I think it was a resin version, one of the older versions. And that was, I think, what originally kicked me off on terrain, and just said, like this thing happened in my brain. And I was like, oh my goodness, I have to run games with terrain now. And so I started, Chris, I love how excited you become when you talk about terrain. It's so cool. It's like, your imagination is one thing, but when you can actually put some physical things on the table, it takes it to a whole new level. But after seeing that, I realized, I have to do something else with my games. I have to, because up until then we just did theater of the mind. And so now I'm looking for miniatures, and I'm trying to find maps and stuff. And so basically miniatures and maps is what I did for a long time. And then when I could start doing terrain, that's what I started doing. And, I mean, it's a great hobby. What can I say? It's just one of those things where we have so many great memories of all these epic battles and things, but then sometimes we have those great memories of the first time we saw a certain thing at a convention, you know, forever ago.
So I have to jump into the chat now for this roll call. We got Todd in Dallas, Doug in Cleveland, Mars Whip is also in Dallas, Comrade 2261, Salem, Massachusetts, but I think Uncle Peter from Toronto is actually putting that in for him. War Eagle Keep is in Arkansas. War Eagle Keep actually produces our Marvel game. Ghetto Stabulous is in Louisiana. Poison is in Kuwait. We got Santa Cruz, California with Chris here. We've got Pokemon for What in Whiterun, Skyrim. Castlegar, British Columbia is Kyle. Louisiana with Roll for Damage. Tampa, Florida here with Grinlin. Zaref Gaming is in Rodizio, New Mexico. And I just lost it. We've got Gamber is in Henderson. I'm not sure where that is. Tucker Author is in Billings, Montana. We've got Lincoln.
I see Sweden.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah, I seen him chatting in there earlier, so I knew Sweden was representing today.
Nice.
We've got like 3 or 4 people from Sweden that comes and hangs out. Underwood Sketches is in Missouri. Regilio is in Utah. Louisville area. We've got with Rick. Doug was answering Breland for me earlier. We started talking for a while, so that always throws off the roll call. Kentucky in the house with Walt. Richards in Orlando, Florida. Ontario in the house with Gary. We got St. Louis, Missouri with the 19th. Sean in the UK.
Hey, UK.
Cannibal Loco in Argentina.
Awesome.
Pensacola, Florida. Denmark in the house.
Yeah, Denmark.
Levi there.
My mom's whole side is from Denmark, and my dad's whole side's from Iceland. So
my
Northern Europeans represented.
My great grandmother came right off the boat from Sweden.
Nice.
Or some little island off of Sweden, and so was my great grandfather. I don't remember him, so I don't know that I even met him. But it's weird that they came to the United States and they both came from this little island, and they didn't meet until they came here.
Love it. Well, my dad, when I was growing up, he always, because we're so Icelandic, Norwegian, and Danish, and my dad's side Icelandic and Norwegian. He's the first one born here. He would always say about the Swedes. He would say 1,000 Swedes took to the weeds, chased by 1 Norwegian. So yeah, good fun. Anyone who has a question, make sure you put question in front of your question so that we can pick it out, just in case I don't want to miss anybody's questions, if in fact you do have questions.
Yeah, absolutely. That is correct. It is so much easier for us to decipher whether you guys are talking to us or each other when you do that. And talking about massive dungeons that are kind of being laid out, Frog Got Games. I've been seeing the pictures from Zach Glazer over there, and they've been printing out their mega dungeon, or one level of it anyway.
Yeah, it's Rapinathic. I forget the level of it, but at the last con, there's a picture of me somewhere on the North Texas RPG convention. I think it's the Facebook page. I am standing there looking at this dungeon just in awe, and I think that they use something like 4 tables, those 8-foot tables. They just put them all together and built this huge dungeon on there and ran games for the weekend. It was amazing, absolutely amazing. So Roll for Damage says, congrats on the Kickstarter, by the way. Thanks very much. We're very happy with where we're at. I mean, we had a goal of $5,000. We're almost to 40, I think, right now, 37 something. But yeah, back on the dungeon, absolutely amazing dungeon. I got to play in a different game without the dungeon, and about halfway through, someone came to our room and said, hey, if you guys want to play on the actual dungeon, we're done with it. Everyone died. And and so we all picked up all of our stuff and went over to the dungeon. And yeah, playing on 3D terrain with your miniatures and stuff, it just adds so much more to it. I mean, he had originally we were using the wet erase grids, and he was drawing it out. He was doing a good job, but to actually be there on the set, so to speak, it's so much different. And having a full-size dungeon like that, one whole level, just I've never seen that done before. I've seen sections of levels done before, but I've never seen an entire level done. And a
huge level at that. That's a beast.
Yeah, and I believe all those resources were Fat Dragon Games. They're 3D printable dungeon tiles. And obviously go to fatdragongames.com, I think.
Keith Hershey as well. I forget. We've had him on in the past. I forget the name of his company, but he also was involved and did some of the.
They're the ones I believe that are printing the terrain. If you want it printed, they have really good printers that'll do it for you, and then they'll ship it to you. As far as I understand, I think that's what they were doing. They were talking to me a little bit about it at the con, but this is several months ago, and I have a 1-year-old, so the memory is not so good these days. Not getting a lot of sleep these days, you could say. So
it happens. Well, just wait. Just wait.
Yeah, well, for those of you who don't know, my wife and I are expecting another baby in either late March or early April. So before the show, David and I were talking about the how crazy it gets when you've got 2 instead of 1. So I'm looking forward to it, but it's going to be one of those things where I'll get even less sleep. But hey, that's the way things go. He's totally worth it, and the second one will totally be worth it too.
Hopefully. You never know.
Yeah.
I always say one of your kids is an asshole. You just never know which one. The better the chances are.
Someone had a question earlier about augmented terrain, and I think that
that was Lincoln from Sweden.
It might have been Doug who pointed out that what they may have been talking about was where you take your phone, and when you look at the terrain with your phone, you've got some sort of additional stuff that you can see, like Pokemon Go. And that would be really neat, but that would require everyone to be sitting there looking through their phone the whole time at the terrain. And one of the things that I, in my own life, try to do is put the phone down and keep it out of my face as much as possible. Not, mostly because I don't know how everyone else is, but when I go to a family gathering or a group of friends or something like that, and you see a bunch of people just, that kind of pisses me off. I mean, I'm not going to lie. It really irritates me. So whenever I have a game, I usually ask people to put their phones down unless they're texting me or each other about something in the game that they want to keep secret from everybody else. That's, I think, the only time I say, phones are okay to use. But I think it's just annoying and kind of disrespectful when you've got other people in the room with you, and instead of interacting with them, you're playing on your phone. But I think that it would be neat to have some sort of maybe you look at the terrain and you have it through your phone, and you have like a magic spell to detect magic, and you can see where there's magical auras or something like that. That would be neat. Maybe there's a detect traps, and there's certain parts of the terrain that it's got some way of knowing there's a trap there, and because you're the rogue with specialty in detecting traps, you can see those and go, hey guys, I think that there's a trap over there or over there. That would be neat. That or detect secret passageways or something. That'd be really neat. But
there's
beyond that,
for that, I think
there is.
A while ago, I don't know how it did, but I remember seeing it, and it was like tokens that you would get, and they'd have stuff loaded on them that you could place on your map. And it might actually be like 3-dimensional terrain, or it might be something else. So I imagine they could like kind of bake that stuff kind of into it. Sean said, there you go. Someone will build an actual dungeon that a party can go through. Traps, obviously not lethal. I think they call that true dungeon and LARPing, to be honest with you.
Yeah, true dungeon. That's a thing. I forgot the name of the guy who runs that, but I get emails all the time about True Dungeon, and they have all their items represented with these little tokens, kind of like the size of a poker chip, I think. That seems neat. That seems like something I would definitely get into, but then that requires you to be at that physical location, wherever that is. I'm not sure if it's a warehouse or something and they've erected walls. I've never done it. It seems neat.
It's
I would definitely do it if it was right there.
it's at cons. They do them at cons.
Okay. Yeah.
I actually just got the email the other day that they just signed like a 3-year deal with Origins
Okay.
to be there every year. But usually the bigger cons usually have the True Dungeon, and True
Nice.
Dungeon like sells out like immediately.
Yeah. Well, I can imagine it. It seems like a cool thing. There's other things I've heard of that are like um, actual real world gaming experiences where the one that I'm thinking of has something to do with you all get together and you're in a room and you have to figure out how to get out of the room or something like that.
No, escape rooms. Yeah,
Escape rooms, yeah. And that seems like a really cool idea to me. And obviously at a convention and you're like in a dungeon, you're like, oh, I have this scroll of reveal secret, and I'm like, okay, I'll use that up. And now I get some information from overhead or whatever happens. I'm sure there's some sort of narrator, dungeon master who's looking over everything and, letting people know what they find, because otherwise you just leave a bunch of people in a dungeon and let them have at it. I'm not sure that would work too well. You always kind of need a narrator.
It's also LARP is kind of the same thing. I feel like it all kind of stems from there. But I like to keep all my tabletop. I like all my gaming at the tabletop. I like to keep it there.
Yeah, and Doug says the same thing. Give me a handful of players and some dice, and it's plenty. Yeah, I feel the same way. And
Too old to be running around the woods with styrofoam sticks.
I used to do amp guard and stuff, and my friends and I would go off and do our own thing with, not regulation staffs and swords and bow and arrows and stuff like that, and we'd have a ball. And I used to play airsoft and stuff too. So, it's fun. It's a role-playing experience, and being able to step out of your own world for a little bit and go and do something different. And I mean, why not? Life's too short to stay inside all the time. But when it comes to tabletop RPGs, I really do like to keep it on the tabletop. And I'm getting more and more into Roll20, and I want to do a lot more Roll20 games, and maybe do some celebrity games. So I'll let you know when we do that. That'd be quite fun. Question.
Kyle wants to know this last UA was on Elven sub races, and he's thinking that maybe they're going to do more races, and he wants to know what our picks would be for more sub races.
Well, I saw it not long ago in Facebook. I think it was yesterday, the day before. Someone was talking about are there human sub races, and that's a really great question. The issue I think you'd run into with that is just being a bit racist, if that makes any sense. Like, I don't know how you would do that. Although what I do in my games is I do have a subclass or subrace of human called Nord, and that's just because I'm 6'6" and 220 pounds, and I can lift huge amounts of weight and all this other stuff. I usually give Nords additional strength bonuses and huge resistances to cold and that kind of thing. Sometimes bonuses to intimidation or what have you. But
oh my God, we have a whole Mary Sue race now.
Yeah. But then there's also detriments and stuff. But the thing is, I think that if you did go into like human sub races, there could be a lot. There definitely could be a lot, but they're not that interesting. I think that part of the appeal of playing a role-playing game is to be something different than what you are. And so, although me creating a Nord is cheeky and everything, I never play one. I just created it sort of as a, hey, this would be fun. Dwarves, I think, would be interesting, especially if they made a playable Durgar and playable. What's the underground gnome? I forgot the name of them.
But they did make them.
They did. Okay. So I wasn't aware of that one, but yeah, I I kind of think that dwarves would be an interesting one to go with, but what can you do besides what they've already got or a playable Durgar?
Well, maybe because in Chult they also introduced some dwarves, but they didn't stat them. So
Hmm.
so maybe that's a thing that we'll see. Duergar is probably like that's low hanging fruit.
Yeah.
Darrow is a possibility as well.
What were the dwarves from the
Are you thinking
um
Dragonlance, Scully dwarves?
no, the Tolkien, the Christopher Tolkien novel that came out a few years ago that was, why am I not remembering this? Children of Hurin. There was a race of dwarves called the petty dwarves. I think what they were called. Petty dwarves? Pretty sure. Um, the petty dwarves were like almost a hobbit like dwarf. They were thin, they weren't stout or anything, and they were really maniacal. And I mean, the way that they were portrayed was very sneaky and stuff. And I thought that was an interesting take on the dwarves. Um,
Is it a
so yeah,
Watts? Is it a Watts take?
no, it was the Christopher Tolkien. You've never read Children of Huron?
I have not.
Okay, I would get it on audiobook. It's pretty good. It's tragic, but all in all, it had a lot of really cool parts in it. Um, but they were they were a dwarf, but then think of a thin, emaciated dwarf almost. And that made them really stand out to me. They were very interesting, that version of dwarf. Um, but yeah, I would say I would be most interested in seeing more dwarvish races or sub races. Um,
So
and
when it
good.
comes to humans, this is how we've kind of talked about on our channel in the past, and that is the idea that if you use the variant race humans and you take feats, you could kind of build out regional cultures that way.
Yeah.
For instance, if you first level, you take mounted combat, and you could kind of bake that into a horse lord type culture, or or maybe even the actor feat. Maybe maybe this region really reveres actors and thespians and playwrights and things like that. So I feel like the human has the most variety of any of the races, really, because if you got the variant, however many feats there are, that's how many choices you have.
Well, additionally, just because your background could define what your subrace as human is. And I think that human, because they get a +1 to everything, is one of the best ones to go with. And, it's sort of a jack of all trades, master of none in many ways, making them pretty versatile. But then you do have the limitations like not being able to see in the dark and that kind of thing. And if I were to make a subrace of humans, I wouldn't allow things like seeing in the dark and all that, because those are things that are pretty specific to the dwarves and elves and stuff. So I probably wouldn't um, go too crazy with it. But I do agree with you. Having your background and your feats sort of define your subrace as human, probably the best way to go. Um, but
So
the Xanathar's guide has a bunch of new content for really fleshing out your character even more than we had originally. So that could also help with defining a subrace.
So Pokemon for what? More mixed races would be cool niche that never gets explored. Dwarf elves, gnome halflings, orc dwarves, dragonborn elves, tiefling dwarves. Know why it never gets explored? Because I feel like it's mainly power gaming munchkins that want to figure out how to get all the abilities, where there is nothing stopping you from playing any of that in your game. Pick a race, use their stats, describe your character different. Done. Literally, one of my first third edition character was Core, the human gladiator, that had like an eighth of an orc in him. So I just described him having grayish skin with a bit of an underbite, and boom, we were done. Exactly. Like
I like that. I like that a lot, actually, because you can you can just use the rules for this race, but give yourself a little bit of flavor from that race. But don't go and grab all the stats. Be like you said, the Power Gaming Munchkins. I've encountered a lot of these. I think we've all encountered a lot of these. Some of us are these. That's totally fine. But when you say, oh, I want the best things from all these races, you can't really cherry pick. You should just say, okay, I'm this race. I'm going to stick with what I got. And if you want to get all those enhancements, go get magical items or something. And that'll be worth it. You know, you'll actually earn those things.
And Tiefling, to me, Tiefling is like the easiest. Because the way you are, you just describe them, you know, you just take that core race of whatever you want to be, and then just, you know, put on, you know, on top of that, you strap on the fiendish features. And then if you're like, oh, well, then my scores don't make sense. Well, then put your scores where you think they make the most sense.
Yeah.
You know?
There has to be a bit of logic when you're building out that character. Now, the thing about races that I really try to stress in my games is that depending on your race, people will behave differently around you. So when they go into a village and you have a tiefling with you, you better have a hood on or something, because people are going to freak out unless this city is welcoming to tieflings or what have you. I mean, people might throw you out of town. Additionally, I mean, same thing with like half orcs and stuff. Or let's say that you're let's say that you're a half orc and you go and you're trying to trade with a dwarf. In my version, I'm going to roll whether that dwarf likes you or not. He might have a predisposition to not liking half orcs, and you need to do some good charisma checks or something to get him on your side, to not be like, I'm not going to sell you anything because you're just going to use it to come back and kill me or whatever. So there's a lot of, you know, preconceived notions that the NPCs might have based on the race that you choose or the way that you look. Let's say that you're a ranger and, you know, human ranger, you come into town and you're just nasty looking and stuff, and you try to go to the, you know, mayor of the town. They're not going to let you in. Like, who are you? You look like some sort of vagabond. So that's something that I try to make sure that the players are very aware of when they enter my world, is that their physical appearance is going to have an effect. And that's why a lot of them, like, there's certain people who will really focus on illusion so they can make themselves look different depending on where they are. So they'll come into a town and they'll go, okay, I'm going to make myself look like a half orc, and I'm going to go to the local thing and trade with the other half orcs. And then when they leave town, they change back into whatever they're, you know, they normally are. So that's adds another level of role play and storytelling.
Yeah, it's something that definitely can often get overlooked depending on what kind of game you're playing, and it's definitely a factor in there. So we are coming right up on the hour mark. So with that, if you just want some closing thoughts there.
Well, obviously we always get off on tons of different tangents. I mean, tabletop role playing in general is such a vast expanse of creative work. We got onto sub races and, you know, all these other things. Really, we'll bring it back to the terrain. And, you know, we're running this Kickstarter. It's ending today at 9 p.m. Pacific time, and really, it's an incredible thing to put terrain on your tabletop for, you know, to enhance the gaming experience for you and your players. And we're really excited about this. We have it at a really good price point, only $25 per set for the unpainted version, $45 for the painted versions. This price will be going up after the Kickstarter when it's available on our website, just FYI. But yeah, we're happy with the turnout. We're happy with the response people have so far, and we're hoping that you'll be interested, and go check it out, share it with your friends, back the project. You can even back it now and upgrade your pledge later. So there's a $1 pledge. You can jump in now and upgrade through Backer Kit. One more thing to add is it's first backed, first fulfilled. So we are fulfilling in the order that things were backed. We feel that that's the fair way to do it. And with the amount of backers that we have right now, it should take us a few months to fulfill. And the first backers will be receiving their stuff probably by Christmas. That's what we're aiming for.
Thank you. And thanks for everyone for hanging out. Thanks for coming on, Chris. Guys, go check out Nord Games in the description. as well as their Kickstarter. You're running out of time if you want to get in on that. So go check that out.
Only 11 hours left at this point in time. 11 hours left from right now, 10 o'clock a.m. Pacific Standard Time. So
with that, guys, until next time, stay nerdy.